This hour of broadcasting brought to you by 𝗃𝗴RadioCenter.com, a Motorola value-added reseller. Welcome to the Church Safety and Security broadcast with the Church Safety Guys. Brought to you by Vigilant Impact. The Church Safety Guys is a nonprofit organization dedicated to equipping the vigilant, those men and women who stand watch, keeping our houses of worship and places of faith safe. We believe church safety and security must be a ministry first and have engaged, servant leaders who continually strive for excellence and teams of motivated volunteers that are always training. Join us for the next hour as the Church Safety Guys unpack safety, security, leadership, and ministry operations with your hosts, Dr. 𝗧𝗵𝗂𝗿𝗵𝗂 and Mike Scully. This broadcast is also available on YouTube, your favorite podcast platforms, churchsafetyguys.com, and on the original Church Security app. Download it today. Feel free to like, subscribe, and share with your ministry.
Well, hello and welcome to the Church Safety and Security broadcast with the Church Safety Guys. I am James, and once again on another fine broadcast, joined by my co-host Mike.
What's up, sir? Good evening.
Good evening. How are you doing today?
Not bad. Crazy. It is actually in the 50s today in Texas, which not common in late April. So we're like, all right, got to break out the code again.
Well, we went, yesterday was almost 90 here. And then today when I got up and got ready for church, it was 36 degrees.
There you go.
So standard Ohio weather, I suppose. But
Well,
I went from not wearing a sweatshirt to having to put one on.
We had baptisms outdoors in the middle of the 50s, which down here, 50s may sound glorious after a cold winter up there, but put it to you this way, is my kids barely go swimming unless it's 90 down here. So it was rather chilly and a little bit of spiritual warfare. Wanted to deflate the outdoor inflatable hot tub for the baptisms, and by hot I mean just lukewarm at best, and then the cold just kind of kept it going. So they had guys trying to fill it up from a hot kitchen sink with 5-gallon buckets after it kind of deflated and let out all the water. So we had some warfare today.
One thing I will mention, I'm working on some background stuff here with our guest because they got kicked out. I guess they're trying to get back in, so we'll have them shortly. But for reference, if this is the first time you've joined us or joined us in a while, welcome. As always, you can reach out to us through our website, which is churchsafetyguys.com, or you can download the Church Security app and reach out to us that way. There's some great free resources on the Church Security app. And as always, we're grateful to 𝗃𝗴RadioCenter.com for sponsoring us with Motorola. And if your organization, if you're listening, if your organization would be interested in advertising or sponsor our podcast, you're welcome to reach out to us through our website, and we can definitely send you some more information on that. So this week was kind of interesting. I had the opportunity to spend, I think, 3 or 2.5 days in training, which every year we try and all of us try and go and do training. And it's really just so that we can get a better handle on the areas that we feel like we need to improve on, because we're just like you in that, we embrace the mantra of always training. We're always looking at, okay, what's the next thing that we can do to improve our knowledge base and help our own churches. And so I had the opportunity up at the Wisconsin conference. One of the speakers up there, and he's been on our broadcast before, John 𝗵𝗵𝗂𝗖𝗵𝗂𝗍 is his name. He is one of the past presidents of the Ohio Crime Prevention Association, and he goes all over Indiana, Michigan, and also Ohio, and does basically house of worship conferences. We've shared some of his stuff in the past and whatnot, but he teaches a class that is basically a certified crime prevention specialist class, which is through what's called 𝗵𝗵𝗃, which is crime prevention through environmental design, which is a lot of acronyms. There's a lot of acronyms in the class. But the truth is, it was a great class. It was a great opportunity to do some stuff with him. And there was a lot, most of the time it's taken by law enforcement. And so there were a lot of police officers there. And I had a great opportunity to really work and network with some of them, because they kind of sat down with me at one point and they were like, hey, we have all these churches reaching out to us and we don't really know what direction to point them in or what to tell them. And so I was like, hey, I've got some resources here. And you're welcome to reach out. So it was a great couple of days. I promised him I would do a shout out. So if he's listening, thanks, John. And we'll have to get you back on the broadcast, but very knowledgeable in the realm of doing assessments and different things like that. So great opportunity there as well, to be able to kind of take a couple of days and learn some new things. So
I think we're still got some technical difficulties going on there with the guest. I will take an opportunity to kind of not something I would normally share, but to fill some space, I guess we'll as we're trying to work through that. Did have the humbling experience to be recognized by my police department this week, and given a Chief's Challenge coin for humility and service.
Congratulations.
And, thank you. It was
That's awesome.
I was not expecting it. I mean, we kind of had our volunteer dinner, and which they do every 2 years, I think. And so we're just there, and I was like, okay, I'm there for the food and the friendship of different folks and so forth, and all the command staff were there, and they're going through different stuff. Well, this was given out. So back in 2022 spring, there was a big EF2 tornado to come through our city, and it caused over $32 million in damage, over 680 homes destroyed. It just, or affected in some way. And so it was significant, but it was to the point where the staff was immediately taxed out. I mean, they were fully to the point where they were working longer shifts. They were working overtime like crazy in the aftermath with that. And so they were really trying to maintain order, because you had potential looting and other things going on in that time period as well. And so as volunteers, some of us, we weren't formally activated, but a few of us kind of showed up at PD to kind of say, hey, we understand you guys are stretched thin. What can we do? How can we help? And that was going to be anything. Can we go pick up food for folks? Can we go deliver it to them in the field? Because they weren't going to have time for their posts. Well, it ended up being there were 4 of us total that ended up taking posts in one of the most affected neighborhoods, where we were actually, so I was paired up with a sworn officer, and we locked down that block, because we didn't want any, after dark, we didn't want anybody getting in and looting and causing any sort of trouble after that. So did a shift for that. So again, not was really just there to help. Never expected anything out of it. But during the dinner, the chief called me up, assistant chief, and surprised two out of the four of us with those Chiefs coins. So quite a humbling honor, and really kind of cool to add to the collection.
For sure. So we have I think we have our guest in the background. I'm going to pull him in here. So it sounds like we got you. So thanks, John. Yeah. I know.
Can you hear me?
Technology can be fun sometimes.
Oh man. I have no idea what happened, and just, we were getting ready to go on. All of a sudden, everything literally just blanked out, and I could not log back on. And so here I am. Adapt, improvise, overcome.
Right.
Thank God for cell phones and all this. So I'm here in the sunroom now. At least I have a good signal, and it sounds like you guys can hear me. So here we are.
Gotcha.
For sure. So I wanted to talk a little bit tonight about, or on this broadcast about, just some of the things that have been happening a little bit in the news lately. And one of the things that I'm not sure if our listeners have really heard about or paid attention to, but one of the things was the news story down in Mississippi. And John and I have, like, through the week, typically we talk about stuff back and forth, and a lot of times we'll send each other news stories and we'll say, hey, did you hear this? And did you see this? And that sort of thing, and kind of talk about, how churches responded to different things and that sort of thing. But the first story was from Laurel, Mississippi, and it was about the Jones County Sheriff's deputy that actually was at church, and then I guess went outside. Someone was outside or causing a disturbance, and the individual, the man, pulled him outside, and then, or the deputy pulled the man outside into the parking lot, and then the man ended up getting shot, and then later died at the hospital. And initially, it was an interesting story, but it turned really quick, because before too long, the AG's office got involved, and all of a sudden the man was being charged. And it was one of those things that it happened so fast that I was just kind of like, this is a weird story. And so I sent it over to John at one point, and I said, hey, take a look at this. And we started, trying to do research and pull up different stories or different news outlets on it and whatnot. And what was interesting was, when it first happened, the sheriff made a press statement saying that the man, it seemed like the man was trying to wrestle with the deputy for his firearm, and that's why the deputy shot him. And then all of a sudden there was a few other things. The AG's office started announced that they were taking the security footage from the church to review. And I think it was within, would you say 2 or 3 days, John? They made that quickly decision. And obviously we're investigating that shooting. And typically in most states, the AG's office will step in anytime there's an officer related shooting. They'll step in and they'll investigate. But what was I'll throw it over to you, John. What was your take on that situation?
From the articles I read, basically it was a gentleman who's creating some sort of disturbance. They didn't articulate exactly what that disturbance was, but he was doing or saying something inside the church, and he was actually escorted out by our suspect. Apparently our victim walked away and then was actually on his way back into the church to try to get back in the church when our suspect walked out of the church to engage him just outside the doors. What happened was, despite the initial press conference that the victim was trying to reach and struggle for the gun, after reviewing video footage and talking to other witnesses, apparently it was the reserve deputy who suddenly lashed out and punched the guy in the head. as our victim was running away, our deputy pulled out a gun and shot him in the back, and then ran up to the man as he lay there and kicked him in the head, enough that the autopsy showed that he had internal brain bleed.
Yeah.
And so the subject died. And so here we've got definitely a lack of any type of ministry mindset.
For sure.
And there's just an absolute loss of self-discipline and self-control. And unfortunately now the guy's been charged with second-degree murder or something. And it absolutely is totally avoidable. Totally avoidable.
Well, and what was interesting was when they announced it, he was at, they announced it at court, and I guess he passed out or something. And so they had to take him out of court. But I saw the same thing, which was probably in a different article, but it agreed with what you were saying, that initially that report that came out was that they struggled, and then the autopsy kind of showed something. The autopsy report from the coroner's office kind of showed something different, along with the video footage from the church. And that was kind of the key, that they said, wait a second, what happened really wasn't how it was painted. And I don't know, I mean, obviously we don't know the extent, if it was one of those situations where he just didn't know that he was being filmed, or he didn't know about the reports that I saw said that he was part of the church's safety team, right, as a reserve deputy. So I would kind of think that he would know they had cameras. But then again, it kind of seems to me like obviously your adrenaline's running, you're in that confrontation, you're in that situation. And it seems like, based on the autopsy and everything else, that he probably just wasn't controlled enough over his actions.
No, I think this is what I would consider a classic example of somebody who's given themselves tunnel vision and jacked themselves up. I think what happened was our suspect became very frustrated and impatient and offended with this man. And you guys have heard me say before, when you allow yourself to become frustrated, impatient, or offended by someone or something, you've increased the likelihood you're going to end up saying or doing something that escalates the situation. He had just got done escorting this man out of the building. Now he sees him walking back in. And I can see where this individual may have become frustrated and impatient with our victim, and walked out there to engage him. Hey, I just got done asking you out of here, blah, blah, blah. And then somehow he just became so focused on this subject that he's offended by, he ends up overreacting. And I can tell you, I have seen not only at my own church, we had sometime around 2017, we had a situation that was grossly mishandled. And it was a few years later that one of our guys finally admitted to me that on his way down the hall to engage with this one person, he was getting himself worked up because he was getting frustrated that he had talked to this person time and time again about this issue we had been dealing with. And you basically, and here's where I encourage people, take a long, slow, deep breath, ministry mindset. So you have an individual that you just escorted out of the building. Is he drunk? Is it a mental illness? Can you articulate someone was in imminent danger of great bodily harm or death? Or do we just need to take a breath and show some more empathy, compassion, and ministry, and just step back out and say, hey, John, you can't be in here. I just got done explaining it to you. And just a little bit of more patience, another 2 minutes of patience, and we would still have a man who's alive and a guy who's not in jail.
Yeah, I think some of it too is the idea that he kind of, I mean, I get if he's trying to come back into the church, that's an escalation of sorts, and that can drive that tension back in. But he's not at the door yet. The gentleman decided to pursue him back into the parking lot, which makes sense. I mean, if you're going to have to engage, I suppose it makes better sense to do so just outside your door than inside, especially if they're making an overt attempt to come back in. But I wonder, was he the only person on duty in that church? We don't know.
Right.
Did he have anybody else he could have tagged in and said, hey, help out here, or recognize that to say, hey, I've had that one run in already, and maybe it's time to tap out and have somebody else address it in the second term. But the aggression, I mean, it even comes back to the conversations we've had before about the decisions to staff certain people in the capacity of church safety and security. The idea is the type of person that serves in that capacity is not always the same as somebody who serves as an officer or a deputy or different sorts. There's overlap for sure, and there's a lot of great ones. But there's also examples, most one that, and that's kind of wonder. They highlighted on the church security piece in the beginning, but they really didn't. Many of the stories that I saw really didn't touch on that more. It very quickly went to the deputy status and the confusing coverage of what he claimed versus what eyewitnesses were claiming, and then of course the video footage itself. So whether he was, I mean, it's kind of odd in that capacity. Is like, okay, I get you can get rustled and that frustration can boil and but the idea that he pursued him out and then to shoot him in the back, it's kind of what caliber of person was this individual to have the temperament where that could happen versus as a deputy, let alone, I mean, I could see it as a layperson.
From most of the news articles, they're consistent. I'm looking at, or I've been looking at one of the Associated Press copies of it, but from what I see on that, not only was he a deputy, but he was a reserve unpaid volunteer deputy.
Okay.
And so, I mean, that I'm not, trust me when I say I'm not justifying any of his actions, because I totally agree with you guys that I think the whole thing could have been avoided. But, you know, understanding and just having past experience with the sheriff's office and working with rural areas where, you know, a lot of times there is unpaid deputies or unpaid reserve officers. Unfortunately, sometimes you have this I don't know, this piece of training, like it's a training issue where someone just doesn't have as much experience in law enforcement as like, you know, like you had, John, where, you know, every day you go in. Typically with a reserve volunteer, it's when, you know, based on, and nothing says how long he was in that position that I've seen. So it's very possible that, you know, his skill set could have just been, hey, I'm going to go to the county fair, or maybe just do an occasional traffic detail or something like that, where he just didn't have a lot of experience with de-escalating or, you know, enough to build his toolbox of doing that. So,
and there's here, can I just say this?
Yeah,
I also see a tendency right here where, because he was the reserve duty, if he had some other colleagues, there may have been a sense of, hey, you know what, we're going to step back and let John take care of this because he's the former cop, he's the reserve deputy, and people could have just stepped back, and then he potentially would have added this mantle of responsibility and to the situation. I need to solve this, resolve this, and fix it because I'm the one here who's quote unquote got the training, the authority, and so on. I've seen that happen too. People in positions of authority, and I talk about this in my seminars, have a slippery slope because they're going to be more easily offended and frustrated if they sense that their authority is being questioned or disregarded. Police officers, parents, supervisors, you know, and this may have been a situation where I just got done escorting this individual out, and now he's coming back in. Oh gosh, now I've got to fix it, resolve it, because everyone here is watching me. You know, all three of us could be at a conference, something could start kicking off, and both of you are going to step back and go, well, John, go de-escalate it. What?
You're not wrong.
Right? And I'll take a deep breath, look at the situation, and say, no, I'm going to send in the big guy. Where's Jared? You know, so, but again, it's but I've been in that situation, and I've seen it happen, not only at my church, And I've got so many stories from my own church, good people meaning well, but because they don't know what they don't know, or they don't have the experience, like you were saying, James, handle situations that could have been done a little bit differently. And it happens all over.
It takes a lot I mean, we've talked about this offline a lot, but it takes a lot of humility to be able to step back in a situation and say, you know what, I need some more help here, and I need some extra help from somebody that's more experienced than me. And when you get to that point where you're amped up and you're trying to figure out what's going on and how to handle it, and your adrenaline's running, and you've got every person, you're kind of on the platform where everybody's staring at you and everybody's waiting for you to make that decision. Wisdom, I mean, there's a lot of wisdom, like you said, in taking a deep breath and stepping back and saying, you know what, I just need to take a break from this. I need you to step in, or, in this case, call law enforcement, take a step back and just say, hey, I need you to send an officer out because this person is, and pull yourself back. And there have been situations, and I'm not ashamed to admit that there have been situations where I've done that, where I've stepped back and said, okay, you know what, this person is really pushing my buttons the wrong way.
Yep.
And I need to step back. You guys have this, you're handling it fine, you're de-escalating, but I've had, a history with this individual, and my, telling him to leave the property or do this or do that, and he's obviously not listening. So guess what? I'm going to go call the police and ask them to send an officer out. You guys, maybe the person wasn't the person wasn't really harmless per se. But at the same time, they weren't intentionally doing anything, other than being snotty or bratty or whatever, sassy, whatever you want to say. So at that point, it's like, yes, I'm in charge, but here's the thing. I need to step back, because if I don't, then I'm going to lose my testimony. Exactly. And I say that, I say that joking around all the time, and I tease people about that, but it's very true. And there's always somebody watching.
Absolutely. With the phone out, with the cell phone recording.
Yeah.
A huge, folks, I can't stress this enough. A huge part of successful, effective conflict de-escalation is recognizing when you're not helping the situation, because you've not been able to establish a rapport connection with this person, or they just are angry with you. They're unhappy with you. I've been in that position. I was the one arresting them, or I'm the one impounding their car. I don't need to try to stay engaged with this person. Disengage and let one of your colleagues do the talking. You've got to recognize that you're hyped up. You may be in charge, quote unquote, but that doesn't mean you have to be the one fixing, solving, resolving the situation. If you're in charge, delegate it. And that's where it's so critical that you have the self-discipline and self-awareness to recognize where you are in that given moment. We all have bad days. Don't let your bad day, because of something you're dealing at home or at work, whatever, affects the decisions you make on a Sunday in front of all these good folks, and in front of someone who probably just needed, I don't know, they say he was creating a disturbance, but again, ministry mindset. Could ministry of mindset, in my humble opinion, ministry mindset would have not only given our suspect the opportunity to show some empathy and compassion, but restraint.
Yep. You talked about hype there, John. I think there's hype goes two ways. I think not just hype of the individual where they escalate up to a certain point and they need to tap out, but it actually something that just kind of came to me. How often do you see in churches that the folks around there ultimately are building up hype for the safety team? So they're creating their own bubble of expectation games, because they're kind of saying, hey, you're the safety guy, or hey, we're so glad you're here, you're keeping us safe, or I'm so glad we have security here, or I'm so glad this. Effectively, they're basically trying to compliment. But at the same point, while they're trying to compliment, they're actually building up this bubble of expectation, because they're kind of saying, hey, you're that safety guy. Hey, you're great. You're keeping us safe and secure. Or they're building this air of pressure, this hype, if you will, onto the expectations of performance of safety in the most critical of situations. Now, we all hope that when we prepare for being able to do so under those circumstances, but we never know, because every situation could be different. So I feel like to some degree is that we have peers, and we may even have pastors that mean well in their attempts to be complimentary, but they're actually building up a level of pressure and hype on the role itself, when we're just there as ministry with a little bit of extra training, with the intention to not just kind of be ready and create readiness, but respond if absolutely necessary. So I think hype is a two-way street there, John. I think it's hype that you can get too hyped up as an individual, but I think we have a culture that's hyping up the security team in many churches, and we need to tamp that down.
I totally agree. It actually kind of goes back to some folks who are overly invested at the idea that they're security, or that they're, the safety team. I'd made some comments on social media, and I had some very strong responses. I made a comment about having a ministry mindset, and someone made a comment, wrong. Ministry goes out the window until that person is subdued or removed from the. I mean, very strong language, very strong attitude. Another person commented, "We have other people to minister to visitors. My job is to keep everyone safe. Too many people rely on me." Very strong, in my opinion, overly invested in this self-identity as security. And I'm looking at this, and I'm like, where's the ministry mindset?
Right.
Where is the recognition that, hey, we're all in this together as children of God. We're here, by the way, security, to support the church's mission. They're not there to support you to wear a little Piggly Wiggly radio earpiece and all that. You're there to help them, the church mission and all that. People hype themselves up, and there's some organizations out there that hype it up also. And I think it's a double-edged sword. Yes, it needs to be taken seriously. Some folks take themselves too seriously.
Well, I mean, you talk about the organizations. I mean, they're out there there's some out there that are trying to imply that just because you're a church security guy, that somehow you're an operator. And I'm like, what? Or the idea of turning it into this executive protection level stuff. Don't get me wrong. There are churches that have that need, have that training, install that level of protection, and I'm not knocking it, but there's some that kind of ascribe to it as this Hollywood-esque, hey, I need to be a bodyguard, and that's not the job. And so it's overhyped to something that it's not. And then you're building this aura of, hey, I can be an operator because I serve at my church. Wait, what?
I had a conversation with somebody not so long ago, and probably within the last month, and they seemed to have a light bulb go off in their head, talking about when the police arrive on scene. And he was talking about how much time would a church security team have actually for any type of room clearing and stuff like that. I say probably not much, because as soon as the police arrive, it's their show.
Yeah,
you need to get out of the way. And there's other things you can be doing, because once they arrive on scene, now you can pick up the slack on guiding other people out of the building. I mean, there's things you can be doing. But don't think they're going to throw you a vest and a helmet and ask you to get in line as they go clear the hallway and all that. I think it's phenomenal training to do and have experienced in. But I don't want people to necessarily expect to think that they're going to actually be the ones to necessarily do all this tactical SWAT stuff. I mean, it's phenomenal training. Go do it, experience it, because it's an amazing confidence booster, a great sense of team cohesion and stuff like that, to know that if you had to do it, you could probably do it. But recognize that once the police arrive, get out of the way. It's their show now.
Right. It's even less of a percent chance. I mean, it's already less than 1% chance that you have an active threat. it's probably that same less than 1% chance, if you have that active threat, that you're actually going to be on scene long enough to be clearing spaces. And certainly not after. I mean, are you really going to get an entire team together to the point where you're now moving as a team? So some of these classes, I feel, are just taking churches' money by building up on the hype.
Well, I think I want to go back to what you said about the hype in general from people at the church too. And, you know, we've seen that. I've seen that at my former church, where, you know, the comment is made, well, we have a security team. And then that, I don't know, that hype is built by the members, like increased by the members, because the members are saying something like, oh, when something bad happens, like a few days before Christmas, we had a vehicle broken into out in the parking lot, and the individual that was out in the parking lot came around the corner and saw somebody breaking into the car. And that individual that was breaking into the car saw the vehicle that they were driving with. We had, I think we used to have like green flashing lights on the roof of it. So they saw the green flashing lights. They took off. As soon as they broke the window, they saw the car. They're like, okay, we're out of here. So they took off. And then the individual that was outside drove over and called our dispatch office, which then called the police, and an officer came out and everything. And I think it was the following Sunday, I had an individual, a church member, come up to me and say, well, why didn't you stop that guy from breaking into that car? And I'm like, what? I'm like, first of all, I'm like, and I looked at him and I said, actually, we did stop him because he saw that we were out in the parking lot and then took off. And I said, and then the next thing that we did was we called the police, and they came out and did what, you know, that their responsibility is. There's a bit of a disconnect. And at that point I said, you know, we are not law enforcement. We are a ministry, a volunteer ministry of folks that, yes, we do training. Yes, we do try and put our best foot forward, and we're constantly training and constantly doing things, you know, to learn more. But at the same time, that's, you know, it's not our responsibility to get involved with something. And very specifically, that's not a threat to life. I mean, that's a threat to property. So later on, when we were after that event, we kind of all sat down, and the guy that was outside in the parking lot came up to me, and he apologized, and he said, James, I'm sorry, because I didn't stop him, and I wasn't able to get out of my car and grab him until the police got there. And I'm like, where does it say in our policy book that you're supposed to get out of the car and grab somebody? And and I asked him that, and he's like, well, it doesn't. And I said, exactly. You did the best that you could. You followed the policy. You followed the protocol. It's not your responsibility to put yourself in harm's way over property. That is not what our responsibility is. Our responsibility is to do the best we can to serve the people in the church, to create a culture of safety and awareness and security awareness, and to respond to situations appropriately according to our training. And, you know, there are times when, you know, to go back to what you said, John, earlier, you know, I probably would default to you because you're an officer, like, or you're closer to an officer of saying, okay, but then I do the same, like I've done the same thing at my church. Like, you know, the pastors have asked me, like, why'd you make this decision? And I've said, well, you know what? The officer that was standing there said, blah, blah, blah. So you know what? He's got the city liability insurance on his side. If he makes that call, then I'm going to default to what he says. And that's what I go off of. And so it's an interesting situation for sure. But,
you know, one of the things I'm always reminding people, and I say this with love and so on, you're a civilian volunteer at a church. take a long, slow, deep breath and just get a grip on this and maintaining this ministry mindset. There is no law, rule, regulation, or policy that says you must, you shall, you will engage with someone in their face, go hands-on. And this whole thing about a citizen's arrest, that went out the window decades ago. You're liable to get yourself hurt in this day and age trying to do something like that. If you went home safe, if your colleagues went home safe, that is a win. We have insurance for broken windows. You absolutely did your job. If you interrupt someone in the act of trying to burglarize a car or a house or whatever, if they took off and the only damage is a broken window, man, that's a win. The purse is still in the car or whatever it is that they were hoping to get. That's a win. That's a win. Go home safe to your family, folks.
For sure. So I want to jump in and with the little time that we have left, I want to talk about another story that happened at a church. And this one was actually at Jamaica, Queens. It was the first in New York. It was the First Presbyterian Church. And what was interesting was this event or incident happened on a Thursday afternoon. But essentially what happened was a lady called the police because there was a man that was moving in front of the building, was walking back and forth and acting erratically, and apparently had a knife in his hand. And again, the media, the news is kind of generic on that. And John, you called them too to try and get more details, and they kind of just said, which is great. I'm impressed that they said what they did, but they just kind of said, hey, refer back to the media accordingly.
Yeah. And by the way, I'm always telling, especially my law enforcement classes, you've got to make sure there's always something you can glean at face value from some of these media articles. Yes, there's going to be a lot of detail left out, but what we do know, man with a knife, erratic in the parking lot. Boom. So right off the top of your head, ask yourself, if that happened at my church this coming Sunday, how would I respond to it? Well, how did this guy do? And how did it go wrong? Well, now I need to make sure I don't do what he did. And in this particular case, a lady came into the church and said, hey, there's a guy acting erratically. Again, we don't know what that means, but he has a knife in his hand. So that's a known issue. Security guy steps out of the building to go, and the words used by the media was he engaged with him. Did he talk? Did he try to go hands-on? We don't know, but he got close enough to get stabbed. And what do we know about the 21-foot rule? And if you're not CPL taught, for people who are listening to this and don't understand the 21-foot rule, basically anyone with an edged weapon, or actually anyone with anything in their hand, can be a deadly threat to you in seconds. They can cover 21 feet and start pummeling you. So you have the 21-foot rule. How and why did he close that distance? Again, I don't know, but he did close it. Got a little nick, and fortunately he survived, was able to run back into the building, locked the door. They called the police. Unfortunately, after a standoff, the subject ended up being shot and killed by the police. But no, he was injured. He survived. Last I heard, he survived. But how can we do things differently if it happens to our church? Whether it's I see someone burglarizing a car, or there's a person acting erratically, one of the first things I ask people if when they come in and or make a comment is there, do you see anything in their hands? A brick, a knife, a gun, a rock? Is there anything in their hands?
Was there another person? I mean, I'd say, is there another party involved? I mean, if they're just out there walking around with a knife erratically, my first question is there anybody at risk, or is this guy just kind of off his rocker? And then is that even my duty, whether they're in my parking lot or not? Do I need to engage? Maybe, maybe not. And so the point being there is he could have called 911 right at that moment. Let the authorities
at least get him coming. Yep.
Keep his building perhaps protected in case the person was going to try to make entry, and then bring that knife into the sanctuary. But in all honesty, he put himself in that position. And to your point, John, he let that 21 feet get closed. And so he put himself on the other end of the knife. And unfortunately, and so there's times where the best course of action is no be there.
That's, you know what, that's correct. I've made that comment to other people too. Doing nothing is still an option.
Right.
Being a good witness, standing back and being a good witness is absolutely a good option. And that's a great point. Call 911 right off the bat. Erratic man with a knife, boom, let's get the popo coming, because you know it's going to take time for them to get there. And this was a Thursday morning, so they got to fight traffic and pedestrians to get there safely. Batten down the hatches, and so,
the other, honestly, the other piece of it too is you go back into the building. There's, like you mentioned on the last story that we were talking about, John, there's always something that the safety team can do. You don't have to necessarily engage with that situation or that person, but you could make sure that no one else leaves the building or goes through in that direction towards that individual, even if they're going out to their cars, right? Because you know, okay, this person's there. So just tell people, hey, look, you know, I'm sorry if you're trying to leave. We have a situation out in the parking lot. The police need to get here for your safety. You know, I'm going to ask you to stay in the building. And if somebody doesn't want to listen, then, you know, at that point, you know, it's kind of on them. But we've done that before where we've had stuff going on in the parking lot and we redirect people through a different door, and they might get mad at us, but we're saying, look, we have this entrance to the building or exit to the building closed right now, because there's law enforcement outside and they're in a situation. You don't have to get into details. You don't have to be, you know, specific, but just say, look, for your safety, we would just ask you to use this door at this time. And in most cases, people are usually appreciative of, you know, of that and of you taking the time to try and help them.
And that's why exactly I encourage people, watch these videos, read these stories, and put yourself in that position. What can we learn from it? What would I do different, if anything at all? These are great training tools if you use them as such. I don't know why this man walked out the building, but what could we do different in the future? And that's exactly why we need to always be paying attention to some of this, recognizing that the media does keep a lot of the detail out of it, but at face value, what can we glean from it? I'm sorry, Mike, I didn't mean to interrupt.
No, it's interesting in that sense too. I agree. The point I think I was going to make was that churches on average, where they're thinking about how do you keep people out, okay, from coming in, aren't always necessarily thinking about what happens if I have to keep people in because the threat or the risk is on the outside. So how often has your church thought about it from that reverse perspective of saying, if I needed to try to keep people here for a longer period of time, what does that look like? And James, I know you've shared a story before of having worship go longer, or the pastors speak longer and keep going. And sometimes that needs to happen. So it's just preparing for that potential scenario of saying, if this happens, here's how we're going to approach it. I guarantee most SOPs don't actually address, here's how you stop somebody from leaving the building if there's a risk to themselves out in the parking lot. So consider that. Maybe consider writing it into your policy.
Now here's a what if. What if this individual, talking about ministry mindset, what if this individual with the stabbing situation, what if he was actually contemplating suicide, was acting erratic, was actually contemplating suicide, but came to church just one more time looking for someone to just listen or to help, and then all of a sudden, out of fear, aggression, because the church security guy did or said something, maybe got too close, did something that triggered the guy to lash out defensively. Now, here's the thing where a lot of people get all bent out of shape when I mentioned a defensive stab wound. If it was actually an assault, and if you've ever seen a knife assault, it's multiple stabs and slashes. It's not a single slash. It's not a single stab. It's usually someone lashing out and then they back away from the source of fear. If it was actually an assault, there would be multiple injuries. But what if this was every contact you have can potentially be a ministry moment if you take a breath and assess the situation that you've got. Because I tell folks, the moment you leave the four walls of your building, a first-year law student would not have much difficulty making you look like the aggressor. Be very, very careful about how you approach a situation. Do you need to approach a situation, just like Mike said? And this is where I come in, telling people, slow down, take a deep breath, and assess the situation. What do you have? Man with a knife acting erratically. Boom. That is a red flag, a danger zone. Let's get the police coming. Do I even need to go out there and talk to him? And if you do, then do it safely. 30 feet away. Hey, sir, are you okay? Can I help you? Can I call someone? I don't know. Ministry mindset. Again, what if he was just a suicidal subject and just one more time found a church and, hey, I'm God, I'm going to give you one more chance, and just needed someone to listen to him. Yeah.
Don't go out solo either. I mean,
right.
Well,
if you're gonna step out, you gotta have a secondary person.
Right.
I mean, both stories that we're talking about here tonight were literally individuals that went out solo. We don't know the situation, whether they were, we know plenty of churches and folks that listen here are the one and only church security person they have in their church. So I'm not knocking that, but if you have somebody, even if it's a greeter, hey, can you watch my back? Not saying you're going to get engaged, but just to have eyes behind my back of my head. Can you come out and just stay back? But I just need somebody who can yell if something else is going on. Is there a second perpetrator? I mean, just because there's one guy with a knife doesn't mean they're alone either. So you don't want to put yourself in that situation.
I'd remind people, and especially I'm surprised at former military people who come in and they have this heavy-handed Lone Ranger attitude. I'm like, if you were in the military, and especially in combat arms, you were taught this combined arms concept where we work together with the Navy, the Air Force, the Marines, and all that. Even Navy SEALs can't get into place without Navy submarines getting them there, without Air Force planes getting them up there where they can do their high altitude, low opening jumps. You know, everything is working together. So why aren't we also utilizing our ushers and greeters and parking lot attendants as force multipliers, those additional eyes and ears? That is exactly right, Mike. It doesn't have to necessarily be another security colleague, but an usher, a greeter, someone to have a second set of eyes on you as you go out, you know, to try to make contact with somebody to see what's going on, to get a closer look, to assess the situation. Yes.
And both these situations, frankly, make a case for something we talked about over a year ago at this point, and is making its way around some circles, but the idea of body-worn cameras by church security personnel. I mean, the level of engagement and things that are occurring is certainly escalating in some degree. I wouldn't necessarily say the sky is falling like some shops do and try to create this spirit of fear, but there's enough where, you know what, the camera itself can be your best friend, because at the end of the day, just like you mentioned, First Amendment auditors and things like that. Well, what better way than to also have our own back by having it all on camera of our own, not footage that then we control, not footage that someone else can carve up and make look bad. And then get that narrative out there. So there's value to considering that as well, especially if you have a slightly larger team. Perhaps you're in a city, you're a little bit more organized, you're blessed with a little bit of a budget. Considering body-worn cameras is an option, and certainly we've talked about that here on air. There's an episode about that, and I actually tested some for a period of time. Our buddy at Two-Way Radio Center at Motorola, they sent out a demo kit, and I set up with a team in my church and wore it for a couple of weeks and played around with the footage and what I could do. And there's a lot of potential value in what you can do for learning just from that.
Absolutely. And years ago, I used to encourage people, if they felt like they needed it, you can go and order just a microphone tape recorder, audio tape recorder. It looks like a pen. Because I tell people, years ago, before our police department got body cams, you know, we just had the video in the car, but our microphone on our body, you know, in the basement of the house was still being recorded. You can still tell a lot from tone of voice, the words used. You can tell a lot from the audio. So yes, prices have come down. You can get a body cam this day and age, but if price is still an issue with your smaller churches and all that, and it's a confidence booster knowing that you've got something to help back up your story in case something starts going off the rails and all that. So even an audio recorder is you know, a phenomenal tool.
Well, you know, Amazon, and we've tested some out and used some at different events, but even Amazon has stuff like that. It doesn't have to be a real expensive thing if you don't have a major budget, but you know, Amazon has a camera for, I think it's about $120, and it actually does a very high quality job. I mean, it's not going to be 1080, you know, 1080p with the camera, but at the same time, you know, it's something that you could easily put on your shirt so that you don't have to be holding a phone, or, you know, you can have your hands free, and it's very user friendly that way. And actually, real quick, Mike, you pointed out that these individuals were by themselves. Was it in Arizona not too long ago that the security person or safety person went outside and ended up getting dragged and attacked by someone? And you know, since then, honestly, we've even talked about it on the broadcast, where we've said, look, don't engage with someone without a second person, without somebody else there. And there have been times, even going outside myself, I'll call somebody else, even if there's not anybody else on. I'll call somebody, you know, that I trust and say, hey, I'm going to step outside real quick, you know, because something's going on. Can you come out with me? Or, you know, can you head this way? And beyond them just knowing what you're doing, you know, also being able to check in. And I've had that before too, where we've had office folks, dispatchers call us and say, and that's their instruction. Like, if I don't hear back from you within 2 minutes of this conversation, then we're automatically calling the police regardless. And some of those fail safe, you know, policies are good to have, because if you get in a situation that escalates quickly, you know, there's a strong possibility that you won't have the opportunity to pull your phone out and call 911,
right.
You know, but at the same time, having somebody else know what's going on and have your back, like you guys mentioned, you know, that's valuable. It's valuable to be able to get law enforcement or public safety, you know, moving quickly.
Yeah. Take a breath, folks. Slow down, assess the situation. Just make sure you go home safe. That's the big one right there. Go home safe. Don't end up inadvertently saying or doing something that can escalate a situation, you know.
Absolutely.
You know?
Well, thanks so much for joining us on the broadcast, John. We always fun having you. We appreciate you.
Thank you for having me.
Absolutely. Take care, John.
All right. So just wrapping up real quick, as we mentioned earlier, if we can do anything to help you or your place of worship out, feel free to reach out to us. You can do that through our website at churchsafetyguys.com. And you can also do that through the Church Security app. And that is available on the Google or iOS platforms and is free. And you can download that and register. And then also, one of the great things that we just added, and we'll put the link in the comments for you to pull up. For the first time ever, we actually have our Church Security Essentials Conference on demand online through Vimeo. And so you can actually go in and you can rent a copy of that for yourself, for your church. There's several different options there, but you can go through and actually get our presentations. John did a fantastic job on his, as well as there's a presentation on there from Mike and I and Dwayne Harris, and we have a special guest presentation. So Dr. Mark Futrell, his testimony is on there, and he was the pastor that a few weeks ago was in Ferguson, Missouri, that de-escalated. He was in the news. He de-escalated a situation. He was a special guest at our St. Louis conference, and so we were able to record his testimony and get that up uploaded onto the channel as well. So definitely check it out. It's worth your time, and there are certainly options there where you can play that for your team or have your team log in and watch different things. And that's a great resource. So until next time, next week, actually, we'll be back, and 𝗲𝗵𝗂𝗍𝗏 𝗏𝗏 will be back with us, and will be his segment on real stories of church safety and security. So I'm looking forward to that, because Jared's crazy funny, and you never know who he's going to bring on for a guest and what the story is going to be like. So
absolutely,
it'll be a good time. But until next time, take care. God bless. Have a great week.
This hour of broadcasting brought to you by 𝗃𝗴𝗏𝗂𝗀𝐷𝑟adiocenter.com, a Motorola value-added reseller. Thank you for joining the Church Safety Guys broadcast, brought to you by Vigilant Impact. We hope that you found it informative, and we appreciate your feedback and interaction. Be sure to share our broadcast with your teams, join the discussion online, and connect with us on social media. For other great ministry resources, download the Church Security app or at our website at 𝗏𝗏𝑠afetyguys.com. Remember, keep a servant's heart, a mindset of ministry, and semper disciplina. Always be training. Have a blessed week.